My sixth Diaversary is coming up, and I thought I would do a video just going back and thinking about my diagnosis and vlogging some of it because I think it's important to share because when I was first diagnosed, YouTube was one of the first spots that I went to find people like me, to find stories maybe that were similar to mine, and it was extremely helpful, and there's not really a ton out there, so I wanted to be a place of comfort for people who were searching for answers like I was. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2020, and so I'm about to be 6 years in at this point. It was right at the beginning of COVID, and everything was just a madhouse. So if we back up to December of 2019, my entire family got sick, may or may not have been COVID, and then everyone else got better, and I just never did. And I kept feeling sick, and then I started getting really thirsty and could not drink enough water, peeing all the time, and I lost 30 pounds in just a couple of weeks. My vision was also going in and out. I would notice if I stood up, the floor would focus weird, and my eyes were having trouble focusing in general. And in hindsight, all of those together, there's an obvious problem, but it was all subtle enough where I never did really think anything was too wrong. I was excited that I was losing weight. I was healthy because I was drinking so much water. It did start to dawn on me maybe something was wrong because I was feeling so terrible. And my mom actually is the one who suggested maybe I should check my blood sugar. And thank goodness she saw those symptoms and mentioned that, because when I took my blood sugar from the meter that I bought at CVS, it just said high, which on that meter meant it was over 600. So I actually don't know what my blood sugar was because I didn't go to the hospital. I just checked it at home. Honestly, I should have gone just straight to the hospital because I was in pretty bad shape. When I got into the doctors the next day, I was dismissed with all of my symptoms, flagged as a type 2 diabetic, and sent home with metformin and an appointment 3 months later. Had I followed that first instructions, I probably would have died. That was a major neglect on their end, and luckily I knew enough at that point that that was not the case, and that most likely I was a type 1 diabetic now, and I needed them to understand that. It took going back to the doctors like 4 or 5 times before I finally was able to convince them to do the special tests required to see if it is type 1 diabetes. I had to fight to get into those appointments, and I annoyed everybody in that office in the process. They were extremely rude, and they thought I was making a big deal out of nothing, when really they were just severely neglecting my medical needs at the time, and I could have died in their misdiagnosis. Once I did get the type 1 diagnosis, I still should have gone to the hospital at that point, but I just got my referral to my endo, which was a few months out. And at that point, I was put on some insulin, but it was just a mix that I took once a day. It still wasn't what I needed as a type 1 diabetic, but it at least helped me control my blood sugar enough to make it to my endo appointment. That still wasn't the right call, in my opinion. I should have been put on the correct regimen right away and not had to have waited. But we finally got into our endo, and at this point it is May of 2020, so we were in full lockdown at this point. They had hazmat suits, and they were taking temperatures with, from far away, of people walking into this office. And everyone had masks on. Everyone there at the doctor's was all very scared of COVID, and it was an odd time to be going to see new doctors. Luckily, I was able to get some sample pins from the endo to now be on a correct regimen of insulin. And then within a month, I was on my first pump, which was the Tandem T-Slim X2. And I had to fight for that also because they had stopped doing in-person training on the pumps because of COVID, and they wouldn't let me get on the pump until I had the training. So through some hoops, we were able to schedule it as a virtual training instead. And it took a lot of convincing on my part to make that happen as well. So finally, I was on the pump. It's kind of been smooth sailing ever since then, once I figured out the pump myself and changed all my settings. And when I was diagnosed, my A1C was a 13, and I've gotten it down to a 6.1 now. And I wore the Tandem X2 T-Slim for 4 years, and then I switched to the Tandem Mobi. And I was on the Dexcom G6, and now I'm on the G7. So prior to me being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, as far as my health normally goes, I was in perfect health, other than during my pregnancies. I had a condition called cholestasis of pregnancy that happened during each of my pregnancies. Without going into that in too much detail right now, there was a situation where the doctors had made mistakes and my life and my son's life were in danger because of their mistakes. I ended up having to do therapy over that situation and dealing with some PTSD. And the therapy that I did over that was called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. After that is when I was diagnosed with type 1 and then having trouble with the doctors again. And it was a very similar situation on where I was not being heard and I was thought of as crazy. So it was kind of triggering the same things that I dealt with before. And I ended up needing to do a little more therapy over this situation as well. I recommend it to anybody who's maybe past being diagnosed, but maybe having some issues with it still. It was really helpful. Occasionally, I still deal with some flare-ups around that, kind of around this time of when I was sick and when I got diagnosed. Definitely seek some help there if you are having any side effects, not diabetes related, but it's affecting you mentally. There's some help out there for that as well. Well, I think that is pretty much the gist of my diagnosis story. It's been 6 years now, which is crazy. This past year has been the greatest of them all. It took that long for me to get in my groove with diabetes, I guess. For a long time, I was just mad. It was hard for me to accept that this was my life now. And now that I've figured out how to control my blood sugars for the most part, and I've gotten back into athletics, everything's been a lot better. It certainly makes my sports and races that I'm trying to do more difficult, but I'm also not going to let it be a reason I don't go after the things that I want to. So that's what I'm doing on this channel now. I'm kind of vlogging my way through participating in a lot of different kinds of races, and I am trying to be a comfort and educate on type 1 as well. So I'm glad you're here. If any of that sounds interesting to you, please follow along. And I want to hear y'all's diagnosis stories as well. So let me know in the comments when you were diagnosed and how long you've had type 1 diabetes. And if your diagnosis story is anything like mine.